Okay, hey guys, we are going to start on our next interface video, and it's this guy right here, okay? Part 2. We're going to be looking at Animate, and we're going to be just going through a couple more tools. We've run through some already, and this is just to sort of pick up and follow on from that. Okay, so let's open up a new file. I'm going to go to Advanced, and I'm going to go and find my ActionScript 3. Okay, take a note of all your details here. Everything looks okay, so we're going to hit Create. Once that opens up, we're going to have our interface like normal. We're going to go to Essentials and reset our Essentials, which is something we should do every time we open up our software, just so that everything is where we expect it. I'm also going to move this toolbar over there. Okay. All right, so a couple of tools I want to run through. Today we're going to look at something called the Transform tool. Okay, we're going to look at the Gradient tool, which is hidden under here. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. We're going to look at the Eyedropper tool, which is here, the Text tool, which is this guy here, and the Align tool, which doesn't show up here. It actually shows up in a palette, okay, which is down here. Okay, so those are the ones we're going to look at, and along the way we'll maybe touch on a couple other ones as well. We'll also learn a couple of keyboard shortcuts and a couple of modifiers. Okay, modifiers are keys that you can hold while you're doing something that kind of force an action. All right, one thing I want to mention is that you can do things in these softwares, like the Adobe software, kind of a bunch of different ways, right? There's like 3 or 4 methods sometimes to do something, and there's not like necessarily a right or a wrong way. Sometimes there's a faster way, sometimes there's a slower way, but the way that you do it, as long as you get the job done, as long as it's not like completely obtuse, then that works for you. Okay, so let's just create a little graphic here. I'm going to go and create a square. I'm holding Shift. We learned that the other day, that will constrain our proportions so that we have a square. I use my selection tool to select that. Now notice I don't have a stroke, so I don't need to double click. I just need to click once because it's only got a fill. If I did have a stroke, say I wanted to add a stroke to that, and then I wanted to select both, I could double. If I click, that only selects the fill. If I double click, it selects the fill and the stroke. Okay, and you can see that changes in the properties as I do that. I only have a fill. Now I have both. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look here at changing things using the Transform tool. Now, like I mentioned, there's lots of ways to do this. I can make this narrower by dragging the points, okay, and that creates a narrower box. I'm going to undo that, Command Z. There's another tool here called the Free Transform tool. So let's first double click and select this and then go to our Transform tool. Now, these two look similar, as does this actually. So just be aware that this is a different tool, and sometimes if you're not careful, if you think you have the selection tool selected and you actually have this, it does some similar things. So you'll see that I can actually move this as I'm moving things around, but get in the habit of not doing that, because you could make a small mistake, which is moving this, which affects this in a way you maybe wouldn't expect. So let's take a look at what I mean. Of course, with the transform tool, I can transform this, so I can make it narrower or shorter or taller. I can scale it up or down. Okay, and that kind of works the way you would expect it to. There are a couple other tools that we can do with this. So if I scale this up in size, I get this cursor. Whenever I get near a corner, I can then rotate this box, okay, so that it is rotating around. And I also have the option to hold Shift. I'm holding the Shift key, and it'll snap to 45-degree angles, okay, as I do that. So if I'm trying to be really specific about it, I can then make that, that's not specific. I can now make that snap at 45 degrees from where I started. Notice that this is 90 degrees from where I started. It's not even though. Okay, I'm just going to undo that and put that back so that it's straight up and down. The other thing I can do is, while I have it selected, I can actually open up here. There's 2 ways to kind of do this. If I go to Info, it'll give me some information about kind of where this is on my screen. And next to that is the Transform tool. And I have here kind of a rotate control, where I can either click and put in a number, or if I undo that, I can click and drag and I can kind of affect that. okay, by giving a specific number. So if I'm trying to do a couple things, I want them to line exactly, I can give them an exact angle and then line things up accordingly. Okay, so that's the transform tool. One thing I do want to mention is this circle. Now, the reason I want to mention it is because as you notice, when I rotate this, it's rotating around that center point, which makes sense. But I can actually change that by putting my cursor in the middle. You'll see it changes from the move icon to this little pivot point icon. And if I move that to another part of the rectangle of the shape, I can now have it rotate around that point. Okay, and everything else works exactly the same as it did. Okay, so I can hold shift and I can, as I rotate, I hold shift and it's going to snap into 45-degree angles. It's going to do everything kind of the same as it did, but you'll notice things are happening around that pivot point. So when I scale this, it's scaling down to this point here. Whereas before, when we had this centered, right, if I scaled it, it was scaling down to that kind of middle registration point. Okay, all right, so that's how that works. All right, so again, you can find that here on the transform palette. You can find info about where the position is. The way I should actually mention this, we'll learn this later in code, and we'll talk about all these things over the course of the next unit as we do these in context. This is just to give you an idea of how some of these things work. Okay, but essentially, one other thing I should mention is that this works on a Cartesian plane, like coordinates. You learned graphing. This works in a similar way, except that the y-axis is kind of the opposite of what you've learned. So you've learned that this point, if you imagine this being a graph, let me delete this and zoom out. If you imagine, I'm going to do this in white so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, if I made this like a graph, okay, or a chart, a Cartesian coordinates chart, this would be my 0, 0, right? You remember this from like grade 5 math. This is my 0, 0 point. And if I went y 100, I would move up on this line. And if I went x 100, I would move this way. And if I went negative 100, it would go this way. And if I went negative y, like y negative 100, it would move down this way. The difference is in Flash, things are reversed. So this is your 0 point. And if I, let's say I take this square and I put it kind of right in this corner here, okay, let's say I go that I want to be at, I'm doing this over here on my position. I'm going to change my x to 0 and my y to 0. Okay, that, get rid of these lines now. That puts that up in that top corner. But if I change my y to 100, which we just said would move it, typically would move it up, right? If I change that to 100 and enter, it actually moves it down because in Flash, where we have our zeros, that number increases up to whatever the width of your screen is, and this number increases. So that's kind of the opposite, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. All right, I'm gonna delete that. Actually, Command A, select everything and delete everything because there are a couple of invisible white lines there. Okay, so that is a bit about the transform tool and a bit about your interface. Let's move on to the gradient tool. So I'm going to make a square here, or a rectangle, and I'm going to click on it, and you'll notice that here on this free transform tool, there's a little triangle. Okay, and I'm going to click and I'm going to hold and see that there's a gradient tool hidden underneath that. Now some of these other tools have got this triangle and some don't. Essentially what that means is there are other related tools related to this one hidden underneath here. And sometimes you'll need them. We won't need all of them. Many of them we won't even touch. Some of them I don't even know, but just be aware that there are some tools sort of hidden under there, okay? So for now, we want this guy, which is the gradient transform tool. Okay, so if I click here, first I gotta select it. If I click here, and I'm gonna go down to my fill color here, which I could do either here, I could go to my my color or my swatches palette, or I could click in here on my fill. Okay, there's lots of ways to do everything. You notice I have all these solid colors, but I've also got this sort of set down here of gradients. Okay, I've got a white to black radial gradient, which is a linear gradient, which is a line. I've got a white to black radial, a red to black radial, a green to black radial, and a blue to black radial, and then a bunch of like kind of, or sorry, that's just two kind of different linear gradients with a bunch of things happening. Okay, let's start off with a really simple one. We'll go white to black. Okay, and so what happens is you can see that that's now going to go from the left edge of my shape to the right edge of my shape from white to black. If I click away from it, you can see it fades right to white and it goes right to black. All right, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to go over to my gradient tool, which is here. And as soon as I click on it, you'll see that I get, it's a little hard to see, but there's a blue line there. And then there's another blue line there. It's maybe a little faint, but it is there. And you can see that there are some new icons that show up. Okay, these are some kind of new things. Now, remember I made this into a shape. Originally, it was a blue shape. And this gradient has been applied to the shape, which means I can also move this. And what you'll see is happening is the placement of the uh, gradient is moving, but the shape, that square or rectangle, isn't moving. Just where the placement of this gradient is. This blue thing here, this whatever these blue lines, this kind of controller of the placement is called a gizmo, right? And I can change the gizmo and then affect the gradient accordingly. A couple things. I can move its position. Okay. I can make it so that it kind of starts and finishes over a longer or a shorter kind of period of or space, I suppose, right? Like more pixels. And I can also rotate it. Okay, so if I put my cursor here, I can rotate it so it's linear, starting at the top, going to the bottom, or vice versa. Okay, again, I can hold shift and it'll lock it to 45-degree angles if I'm so inclined. Okay, all right, so that's fine. I'm going to click here on my selection tool. I can also make some changes to my gradient. So to change the gradient, right now it's going from white to black. I'm going to go up here to window and I'm going to open up my color palette. Okay, and that's going to give me this here. Now, right now you can see this is set as a linear gradient. While I have it selected, I can make some changes. I can make it into a radial gradient, which starts at the center at white and goes up to black because those are the two colors we have selected. So I can go linear, white to black, and you'll see here white to black, or I can go radial, white to black. I can also make some changes by changing this white. If I click here, notice that this gets selected when I click on it. Okay, so if I click around the white and say, okay, I want this to be like orange, and I want this to be, another darker orange. Okay, that's now going from, maybe I'll make it a little less. Okay, so now that's going from orange to like a darker orange. I can go back to my gradient tool here and I can move my gradient around, okay, depending on what I'm trying to create. I have a couple more controls when it's a radial gradient. So I've got, again, I can affect the kind of size and orientation of that gizmo, okay. I can change how large or small the gizmo is within the shape, okay? And then I can also rotate. Now the rotate doesn't look like it's doing anything, but if you say you squished it like this, then that's when the rotate would actually look like it's doing something. If something is round and you're rotating it, you're not gonna notice a big change, but you get the idea. Okay, so that's how you would maybe affect that. Okay, and then I can change that position. Now this is all going to take. Notice that when I click off of it, I'm going to go back to my gradient tool here. My gradient, this gizmo, only shows up while I have this tool selected. When I click away from it, this is no longer, this is just another shape. If I put another shape, say I will put like a teal shape right next to it, that's not, right, that's not doing anything. There's nothing next to it. You can't see where that gizmo was. It's just saying where the shape was on this object. Okay? All right, so that's gradient. There are linear gradients, there are radial gradients, and we can also make some changes to a gradient. So let's go, while I have this selected, I'm going to go back to my window, open up color, and so you saw there that we had kind of orange to dark orange. I can also do things like add in another color. So right now, to make it really obvious, I'm going to go to linear. Okay, so it's going from left to right. And I'm going to click right here. Notice that when I get close to this bar, I get a little plus on my arrow. So if I click here and say I want it to go to pink, which is a terrible idea, but I did it anyways. It's going to go from orange to, well, I guess not pink, fuchsia or whatever that is, back out to my dark orange, okay? I can, of course, change that again just by dragging here to whatever color I choose, okay? There are a bunch of little controls here which give you like some control over how you select the color. There are millions of available colors, 16 million, I think, so you have a lot of color choice, okay? All right, and that is how we use the gradient tool. We can add colors, we can take away colors. So say I decided that was a bad idea, I can just drag that away and it disappears. Or I can add a new one in, I can add as many as I want. and then change each of them according to my preferences. There we go. Okay, and then we have a really, really ugly gradient, but nonetheless, we can fix it. Okay, so some of the things I mentioned so far: gradient. I talked about linear and radial gradients. I talked about the gizmo, which is like that blue thing here. I talked about some of the icons that show up and controls we have over the gizmo. We talked about adding and removing colors within a gradient. Okay, so let's close that up and move on. Again, we're going to do all of this stuff within the context of other activities. I'm just running through some things so you can see some of the things that are available. And then in class, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of play with the software and kind of create a few things on your own, practice some of these and cement the ideas. Okay? All right. Let's look at a couple more tools. The eyedropper tool. So the eyedropper tool you may recognize from some other applications. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go up to this guy and I'm going to copy this image and then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to paste the image here into my Flash document. Now say I wanted to recreate this. I'm going to go to my square here and I'm going to hold Shift, and then while I have this selected, I'm going to go to my eyedropper tool and I'm going to click on that red, and it's going to pick up that red and apply it to my fill. Okay, say I wanted to notice that if I do have this selected and I click the icon for the eyedropper and I pick up a color, it changes that because I have it selected. But if I don't have it selected, say I've got this selected over here and now I pick up my eyedropper, it's not changing. It's not changing this because I haven't got it selected right now. Okay, I can notice it changes to this paintbrush. I can actually click that and now it'll apply it, but that's not what I want. So I'm going to undo that, go back to this red. I'm going to make, actually what I might do is just take a copy of this, copy, paste, and move that over here. I'm going to bring it down in size by, let's say, bring it down to 95. I'm going to lock this so that they go together. Notice that if I do this one here and I go, say, 60, it only does the width. I want to lock those so that one goes, so does the other. So I'll make that 90. Now they both went down to 90. I'm going to put this guy here. Actually, I'm going to change the color first. So I'm going to go eyedropper, make that black, and then I'm going to drag that here into the middle. Now, you'll notice that's not really aligning the way I want it to. It's able to align to the edges, which is okay, but I can't sort of get it to the center. Let me show you how I would do that properly. Let's get rid of this because I don't need this anymore. All right, so I've got these two things here. I'm going to open up a palette called the Align tool, or the Align palette, which is right here under Window. Okay, and what you'll see here with the Align palette is, let me get rid of that guy, is that we have kind of a lot of options. Okay, we're going to look at just these for now. We'll talk about distribute later, but we're going to look at the Align options, and we're going to also look at what Align to Stage does when it's checked and when it's not. So if I click on this guy here, and I say align to stage and I go, align to top edge, it's going to move the top edge of this to the top of my stage. If I move it down, it moves it down. If I move it right, it moves it right. Okay, that's pretty obvious. Same thing with this. Okay, I align stage, I move it left, I move it to the top, fine. So that's pretty straightforward. Say I want it, let's move this out of the way for now. Say I want this to be centered. So I'm gonna move this right off of my screen here. All right, so I want that to be centered. Well, align to stage means center horizontally and vertically, and now that's aligned to stage. Okay, we do the same thing with this. Not forget which is in front. That's in front. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. I can now align this like this, but the problem is that's in front of the other one, and actually it disappears. Watch, if I click away and move it, because this is on the same layer, it actually overwrote that dark one. We saw that in the last tutorial. So I'm going to undo those two steps. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this guy here, put this guy here. I'm going to, because I want this one in front, I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go edit, cut, and then edit, paste in place. It's going to put it back where it was, but it's going to put it on top of the stacking order. So notice it's now on top of that, which is what I want. I can select both of these things, and if I click off this align to stage, let's move them over here for a second. If I click off this align to stage and then I click align, it's not going to align it to the stage center. It's going to align it to the center of these two selected objects. So if I click here, now it went to where those two objects were horizontally distributed. Okay, if I do the same thing here, it's now going to align these vertically to each other. No, it's not. Let me undo that and is that not working? I'm going to try that again. I'm going to align them vertically and align them horizontally, and there that worked. Okay, and now we've got, and now say I want to put that aligned to the stage, which I probably could have done in one step. There's my object. Okay, notice again that these are separate items because they're on the same layer. If I click and move this, it's going to cut that piece out of this. Okay, so notice that this is a empty box. It is, however, note a fill, not a stroke. This doesn't have, this was a box, a fill. Let's step back a couple steps to here. Okay, this is a fill. This is a rectangle or a square with a red fill and no stroke. So when I put this, when I align these two things, okay, here, it doesn't turn this into a stroke. It's still a fill, right? So when I click on that, I still have a red fill there. Okay, anyways, I'm going to move on. I'm not too worried about this. You guys will get this as you play with the software and learn things. Okay. The last thing I want to mention is the type tool, and that's pretty straightforward. You click on the type tool, you wait for the computer to catch up, and as soon as it does, you just click and you start typing. Okay, and you can then select some options over here by changing, your physical size of your type and your font to something, trebuchet. All right, so, and of course, colors and all that sort of stuff is exactly the way you would expect it. Okay, type is a little bit funny in that it is not a graphical element in the same way that other graphical elements are. Like I can't change the color to a gradient without breaking this apart, because like in Illustrator, if you remember from Illustrator, this is a piece of text, and there's some information held within that so that you can do things like change font and change letters. So we'll get to how to affect things a little bit later. But for now, that's it. And you can now go and practice with the software and kind of get used to how the tools work. Okay, great. Good luck.